Hey, Blue Table fans! Shockwave of happiness. All right. So listen up. I have a web store, bluetablestore.com, and I'm going to put the link in the liner notes. And it's mostly just extras and a bit of a junk pile at this point, but some good deals on there. Anyway, plug. I also have a section called Luxury and Unusual Items, where I think of things that I could do or people might be interested in. I just put them up on there. And one of those things is that I'll talk about a topic of your choice for a certain period of time. 10 minutes is one of the listings. So this video is dedicated to Gerald, who took me up on that offer. And he says, by the way, thank you very much. And you guys should thank him too. It says, I would like a video of you talking about the future of miniatures in general. Will GW and others start selling designs for 3D printers rather than having models in stores? What is your personal opinion of such a changeover? Finally, how would that affect companies like yours and the industry as a whole? There's a lot to unpack, and let me tell you, it's going to be more than 10 minutes. Let's flash back to 1998. I owned a game shop in Oregon called Invincible Wargames. And boy, did I love my shop. Somewhere out there, there's a VHS tape with me at age 28 talking about what I want to do with my game shop and a bit of a ramble about the future. Now, I wish I could go back in time and give that younger Sean some more resources and advice and some funds to do those wonderful things that I thought about. Anyways, at the time I had an account with Games Workshop, and they mostly sold metal figures, and that's what you got. And I think it was 98, I was invited, as an independent retailer, I was invited out to Reno where they did a conference. This is when the independent retailers were an important part of their plan. And at the time, I predicted that the independent retailers would just be ultimately cut loose. And boy, was I wrong. It's 24 years later. They still have independent retailers. However, they definitely treat them a lot differently. Like, it's rough. It's rough to be an independent retailer and carry Games Workshop product. Well, and at the time, you could order Games Workshop stuff through distributors, where you would just call, say, I think at the time I used a distributor called Alliance. And by the way, I loved my rep at Alliance. So easy to get along with. They just gave me what I wanted. There was no high pressure sales, and I could just get my order. Thank you very much. Totally accommodating. But eventually Games Workshop cut the distributors out and said, hey, anybody that wants to get a discount, they have to get an account with us directly, which is well within their rights to do it. But at the time, I was not very keen on it. It definitely didn't make it easier for independent retailers. But anyway, oh boy, if I leave the comments on now, oh geez, it's gonna get ugly. I don't know whether I'm gonna leave them on or turn them off. All right, so well, please be nice. So anyways, but it was metal, and about this time, a local guy invited me out to his workshop, and he said, he showed me how it worked. So you would make a green stuff master, which is very difficult, took a very specific skill set to make those, and you take 2 vulcanized rubber discs, and with heat you would melt it around the master, and that's how you'd make a 2-part rubber mold. And you would spin the disc. Once it was finished, you would spin the disc, and you'd pour your hot metal in the middle, and it would be drawn out to the edges and fill up the things, and you would open it up, and out would pop your metal figures. And that's what Games Workshop sold. And in the late 80s, these metal figures were about $3 or $4 each is what they cost. And yeah, so it was metal. And I went, so back to the conference. So I go to Reno with a friend of mine, and so we go out there, and Games Workshop unveils something, the big deal. It's an Eldar Falcon Grav tank. and it's done in an aluminum mold. I don't remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure they had the mold there for you to look at. And they could just bang them out. And we didn't know how much they cost. I think it cost them like 25 to 50 cents each. But that's after, of course, you make the mold and all the. It's like $10,000 at the time. I think it was like $10,000 to make one of these molds, and boy, you had to get it right. But once you did, you could hammer out those plastics, where literally the box you get your thing in probably costs more than the plastic that's in it. It's nuts. So anyway, and that was the big technological improvement, was plastic molds. And they didn't have, like, they had Warhammer Fantasy Beastmen. If you remember the old one-part Beastmen, and they are bad. Like, they had to have big clunky parts of them so the mold would work and fill properly, and it was not great. But the Falcon Grav Tank was actually really awesome. We were all very impressed. And slowly after that, they started making the other plastics. And now, of course, 2022, we have games. See how this is all tying together to the question? We have plastics that are, like, the range is almost entirely plastic. Like, I don't think you can buy metal from Games Workshop anymore. And by the way, that was a smart move, because around the late 90s, you had a thing where they what did they do? In the U.S., they like cracked down on the importation of lead, so you couldn't have lead toy figures anymore. So then they had white metal. I think it was, God, there was a company that was like really good with the, like they had some special alloy that they were using. And oh my gosh, what was it? Was it Mongoose? No, that can't be right. Anyway, so Games Workshop has been a little bit ahead of the curve. And so plastics. And now I think Games Workshop's to the point now where they have so much revenue coming in that it's like, and they must be doing the aluminum molds in-house now and getting that cost down to where it's like, I don't know, maybe $3,000 to make one of those molds. And it's cheaper now, like the technology of, what is it called, like 3D sculpting things, CAD is what they used to have. And then now, whatever they're using. Of course, people are going to school. And that's a big deal in an industry, is if schools are popping up where people pay to go in the school, and then they're popping out these graduates that already know how to do 3D sculpting or whatever, and as a consumer of that, as a larger company, you just pick up these grads and you don't have to pay to train them. And I think that's of course what's happening now with 3D printing, is the barrier to entry for someone to have that expertise is pretty low. You end up with instead of 2D artists, you have 3D artists. And of course, I think with a few exceptions, like, it just happened. It was just like so quick where I was like, oh, I guess that industry disappeared. The old thing where someone would actually sculpt a physical miniature out of two-part, whatever, like green stuff. Two-part putty. I almost said epoxy putty. I don't think that's right. So anyway, so it's changed a lot. And I remember when it was like the debate, this is like early 2000s, the debate, some people were like, oh, I love my metal miniatures, and they didn't want any plastic in their army. And that's really where War Machine had a lot of appeal. But that has to do with the technology being like the barrier to entry. Like, a guy can figure out how to do vulcanized rubber molds, and so that's where these smaller companies, it's easier to do metal than that giant thing where you got to pay $10,000 to get an aluminum mold made, right? And so that's where Privateer Press was rocking it, because they still had the old, and I think they had some tagline, I can't remember what it was, where they were sort of playing on the things like, yeah, our models are actually made out of metal. But there's practical limitations to that, and of course that has to do with another topic. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is stable currency. It's near and dear to my heart, but I try not to talk about it, because it's one of those things where, like, don't get Dad started on debasement of currency. And it's where the paper currency, how do I explain this? Where the paper currency is devalued so much, houses aren't going up, the dollar's going down. So so like in India, I remember it was like razor blades. Eventually, the value of just melting down metal objects became more than the coins were worth, and that's how it works. So basically, if you can melt down copper pennies and have more copper than the pennies were worth, that's when you have, like, this line is crossed with the value of the actual metals. And that, I think, is what defeated the old industry of metal figurines. That antimony, lead, whatever else, nickel that you put in. I actually had a little smelter and was trying to make my own figures at one point. This is in like California in like 2002, and boy, and it was a disaster. Like, I couldn't do it. I was just lucky not to have burned myself severely while attempting to melt all this metal in my little pot and somehow get a mold going and do gravity molding. And I didn't know what I was doing. I actually know more about it today just from picking up things here and there. So that's the old technology. There's a book, I can't remember the title of it. I read it several times. It wasn't Freakonomics. It was basically about disruptive technologies that come along, like the travel agents were put out of business by the internet. So the internet's a disruptive technology. And right now, I don't think the internet is done with humankind. Like, we're still adapting and getting our heads around, I have this in my pocket and I can look up anything and just have it there. And seriously, you could probably be mostly a doctor just by going on the internet and finding good resources. Oh boy, that's going to come back and haunt me, that little statement. All right, anyway, but my point is, you can now get all this knowledge. So it's definitely changing the world. I think the world is better. But let's get back to miniatures. So that's the context of these other things that I'm going to say. So talking about the future of miniatures in general. All right, here's my prediction. My prediction is the local game store will still stick around because it has its roots not in practicality, but in sentimentality of humans. Basically, it's a place where you can physically get together. And I don't think that, if it hasn't gone away already, I don't think it will ever go away. Like virtual worlds, my kids were playing Skyrim for a long time. Side note, I can't play video games because I get too involved in them and my real life just goes out the window and I'm super hard to get along with or even get anything done if I'm playing video games. I actually haven't played video games for at least 12 years. And Magic. Can't play Magic either. I get too into those things. So anyway, there's these virtual worlds that you can go into them. I read a book, I think it was called Reality Sucks, and it was basically that, well, what happens, like, they built the Hoover Dam. You could have built the Hoover Dam like 4 times over in the amount of gameplay time that people played on Halo 3 for a year or something like that. Like, we're spending all of our time in these virtual worlds building nothing, just being entertained. And so I think that my point is, I think if the local game shop has not been killed off already, it's probably always going to stick around, like that model. And unfortunately, it places a lot of burden on the game shop owner, because that is not a luxurious life, guys. Like, you are just barely making, like, you have no idea, that gaming area, that's probably costs, minimum $500. That would be like a super low amount. Probably between $1,000 and $2,000 a month is how much it costs to maintain just all that space, just to have tables in it and have people come in, play their game, buy some snacks, and go buy their stuff online. So what I think is going to happen, my prediction is you're going to have 3D printing bars. When 3D printing gets fast enough, you're going to go in, you're going to see physically printed things, because the game shop owner will have a license to do it. Yes, because the deal with being a Games Workshop retailer, just got like worse and worse. It's like Cloud City. Like, pray I don't alter the deal further. You must now buy 12 Warcry box sets, whether you need them or not. And I'm just like, and what's going to happen is the game shop owners are finally, if they get like some leverage, it's going to be awesome. Or it will possibly be terrible, as I will explain in just a minute. So my prediction is 3D printing bars. And you might think, well, why don't you just do it at home, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's a barrier to entry for that. Like, you have to learn how to use this technology. It's like that there's still Kinko's. People still go to Kinko's. Sure, they got a home printer, but they go to get maybe bigger things done. And so there's different barriers. There's a skill barrier for the consumer, like myself. Like, do I want to go on Etsy and pay $20 for this figure and have it done right and have all the supports done and not have to deal with it and literally just say, here's my $20 plus $5 for shipping, and this model just appears and I open it up and it's like, it looks good, maybe a little bit of touch up, but I can just prime it and paint it? Or do I want to deal with a 3D printer on my own? And the answer is, well, it would be a good investment for me to do the 3D printer on my own, which, by the way, I have done recently. I finally just sort of squeezed it out for my sons, and they're working on it. But again, with the barrier to entry for the individual to learn the technology, I haven't got there yet. I haven't worked myself up to finally, learn to do that 3D printing. And then there's a money barrier to entry. So imagine these really cool models that maybe are larger, or they're better to be printed on a more expensive, larger printer. I think that's what's going to happen, is these game shops are going to get these larger printers, and what will happen is, in the back, they'll have a suite of maybe 10 or 20 of these, and you'll literally just go in, and you'll be like, oh, beep, 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 beep. I put together my, whatever it is, army, my alternate sculpt Eldar army, space elves, right? And and in the back, in the course of an hour, like I'll go play my game, and as let's say in 2 hours, they printed off my arm, like it's ready. They'll just be like, ding ding, army ready for so and so, and you'll just go back and have your figures. This, of course, will make the value of figures just fall right out of the bottom. It's rough. And like Forge World, let's go back and examine the history there. Back in the 90s, early 2000s, there was a company that got a license from Games Workshop to produce their big guys, Titans and big grav tanks and stuff like that. I actually still have one. And ArmorCast produced all these things. They did an okay job, but the fact is, when Forge World was created and took over, which is Games Workshop's home brand company for big guys, and by the way, Forge World's doing good. They're doing it just fine. So it's so Forge World. I think Forge World is like, they're in a rough spot, man. First, it was the recasters, and it's such a tough call, and people have a lot of strong feelings about this. And I'm with copyright owners and to be able to eat the fruits of your labor and all of that. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with people making their own game. Like, you don't own a copyright to, guys in big, space guys in big armor. And so it's tough, because you would need a huge amount of brand loyalty to keep hold of this industry now with what's happening and about to happen. And I don't think that loyalty is there. I think that, and I saw it with the recast too, and experienced it, because I would have clients say, hey, can you paint such and such? And then they would send me the models, and it would be recast, which is, by the way, is absolutely horrible quality. Forge World does a great job, and frankly, I think with labor costs to deal with terrible recasts and the terrible quality of them, oh wow, this comments section is going to explode. Yeah, sorry guys, I'm gonna have to close down the comments section. You can email me if you want me to follow up on different topics, or better yet, go to the link in the liner notes and have me make a video and talk about it. And by the way, thank you very much. It helps. It's nice. And it helps me with my mental health because I get money doing something besides painting miniatures. That always gives me a particular thrill. All right, so back to the topic. So now you've got 3D printers. And guys, they're really good. There's filament printers, which is like a spool, and those are the ones where you see like the lines in them a lot. But those are great for terrain and like big things. And by the way, a local aircraft or a local company that works with aircrafts hired me to realistically paint these aircraft parts that were 3D printed. They didn't go on planes, just for the record. They were only there to help like a display like for mechanics and stuff like that. And that's another topic, by the way. So we had to come up with a thing where a formula where you could spray it and it would fill in those lines, basically, because they had to be smooth. Apparently they're printing them on filament printers. Looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what's happening. But then there's also resin printers. And let me tell you, those produce stuff. It's so smooth. It's so silky. There's an Etsy shop where the guy, he's a wargamer, and when he prints stuff, he has his own formula. And I got to tell you, it's almost exactly like GW plastic, Forge World resin. It's silky smooth. It gives just that right amount. An issue with resin right now, if you get things off of Etsy, especially if somebody doesn't know anything about wargaming or miniatures or something, they print this thing, and man, those things shatter like glass. That's an issue. So, but my prediction is, just so you know, is that all of those kinks are going to be worked out in the next 2 to 5 years. Like the printers we're going to get 5 years, the resin that's going to be used, it's going to be so good. Guys, it's going to be so good. It's amazing. And so now, oh my gosh, so many, and I don't think I even covered the topics here. I'm just going to keep going. This is going to be like 40 minutes. All right, so yeah, my prediction is game shops will have, and it'll be like in addition. They might even have a separate location where they just print it, and a guy runs it over, and you get them on the spot. Because if you could have like for 2 hours, you could have 20 printers running. Well, then you just print it all out at once. 2 hours later, it might be done. So not sure, but the time will get really good. Alternatively, it'll fragment even more, and you'll have what already exists. There's a zillion Etsy shops. There will be local shops where you can just kind of get in touch, like through a bulletin board or whatever. There might even be a hybridized thing where the game shop, and game shops would be smart to do this, would be to create an online like site where it's like, oh, we have licenses for all these things, or we can print all these things out, and maybe they don't even hold the license. They just have 5 guys with printers locally who are reliable, and maybe they give them specs, like you have to use this kind of resin because this is what our customers expect. And the game shop will simply sub it out to these people, and maybe even be able to do it like on the spot, like I'm predicting. Between the printer speed becoming faster and then places investing in having suites of printers, because right now it's just, a guy has 1, 2, 3 printers, maybe 5 printers, but they're not that expensive. And because you're talking like a barrier to entry of maybe to get a suite of printers, maybe $1,000 to $6,000, right? But your regular Joe typically doesn't have $6,000 to just go out and drop on printers. So that's going to be like just that little barrier to entry that's going to allow your local game shop hopefully to do well with this stuff. And so, but it's just mindset. Like you go in, you think a game shop has like all these blisters and stuff on the wall and box sets or whatever. And they're so cheap, like cool mini or not, man, it's like $1 a figure, and they're like good. I think they're doing the Game of Thrones game, Song of Ice and Fire. Those miniatures are pretty good. And it costs, discounted, it's like $27 for 12 figures. Now that's good. That's where GW should be. But they're doing good because I think they're playing again on human sentimentality of prestige. So like, when I go to a place and I have my Catachan Jungle Fighters, which you guys have seen on this channel, and if you haven't, you should go look them up. They're all 3D printed, and they, you know, but it'll be like, oh, you just got a 3D printed army. And, you know, there will be that lack of prestige to have genuine things. And you've seen that, and I think I don't know what Games Workshop is doing to our brains, but you'll see that like, someone's like, oh, I have this Warhound Titan, I'm going to sell my Warhound Titan, and people like, is this genuine Forge World? Well, it could be literally exactly the same, but if you got the certificate, now you've got something. And of course that affects the price too, which is where recasters have really thrown a freaking wrench in the works, man. Guy, just, yeah, I wish that hadn't happened. And of course, yeah, just because the value was like so disparate. Like, oh, here's Forge World 1000, or you can buy it here for $250. And that's just incredible. So anyway, all right, would like video to talk future. Will GW and others start selling designs for 3D printers rather than having models in stores? The answer is they'll have models in stores until they absolutely can't do it. And when that era ends, I will be very sad. Or if it ends. So I predict there will be, it'll be a while long. Like the presence of actual models in stores, nothing's gonna beat, again, playing to human instinct, which is immediate gratification. It's like, do you want a burger right now when you're hungry? Or do you want 3 burgers in 3 hours? The marshmallow test. And so, like there's a local shop here in Salt Lake that packs Games Workshop, like pretty much 100% of the time. You can go in and find it 3 or 6 deep of any model. They've got so much of it. I mean, it's just, it's insane. And how many times do I pay, you know, more to just go in and get it? Now, part of that's just FLGS loyalty, but part of it is also, well, I just want to get the figures. Hey, let's go now and go pick up some figures here. And so instant gratification is going to play into that. Games Workshop they could bottom out their prices if they had to. The prices are high now because they've got the demand, they've got that loyalty, they've got kind of tournament set up, like the competitive players have to have real Games Workshop models typically. So it's going to be a while. It's going to be a while, and I predict if Games Workshop ever did like the subscription thing. Oh, and by the way, for those of you that don't know, there's a lot of companies now where they basically every month they create this suite of 50 or 150 figures that you can just print, and they just sell the files, and you get a subscription. And so, like, I don't know, Dragon Trappers Lodge, I think is one. I know a bunch of them, I just don't know them offhand. I actually had some licenses for a while, back when we were trying to print with another 3D printer. And so anyway, my point is that's an emerging business model now. You can go on Etsy or wherever and just order the models, or you can get the STL files through things and print them, or companies, subscription companies, and just print them out yourself. So yeah, how is this traditional dinosaur method going to compete with this? It's like, well, once you have that momentum and you're doing your 10,000 aluminum molds in-house for, I don't know, with you know, the actual person 3D sculpting them, I don't know, $3,000, or maybe what if like a whole box set, like Cursed City, say, what if that only cost them like $15,000 to produce all of the things for it, right? Man, and for a company that's raking in like 20 million a month, it's nothing. It's amazing. And so, yeah, they could, Shelob style, they could just try and crush their prey by just dropping those prices. But of course, that creates another problem because in your mind, you see those Games Workshop figures and they're valuable. But something's happened for me. I had a client who's into Warhammer Fantasy, and he wanted me to do some dwarfs for him. A dwarf army. He's like, I'm just going to start out with a unit of guys. And I went and I looked up 10 dwarf hammerers, I think it is. They're not super old sculpts, but they're not, I think they've been out at least 15 years. $55. And that just, something in my head just went, I'm just like, oh my God, $55 for like 10 dudes. And I'm just like, oh boy, how long is that gonna last? That's rough, guys. $10.50 a guy? No, wait, I'm sorry. I do math. $5.50 a guy? I don't know, man. I don't know if the box looks that great. So the answer is Games Workshop will sell something. They'll do something with it, but it won't be obvious. It won't be like these other companies. They'll just dip their toe a little bit at first. And once you see that, that's a crack. That's a crack in the dam. You know, we'll look back fondly at this age of these wonderful Games Workshop plastic models. And because frankly, if they were all equal and I didn't have to put them together, I prefer Games Workshop plastic and Games Workshop designs over, I think almost anything else that I could see or I could imagine. Like it's so good. However, man, it's a tough call. I predict they'll dip a toe. There will be some hybridized thing, and yeah. All right, here we go. What is your personal opinion of such a changeover? Oh, well, I just told you that. It would be end of an era, and I think the quality would go down. And because right now, like, I keep referencing Etsy. That's where I buy 3D printed stuff, or have bought it. Not a lot, but you know, enough to kind of know how it works. Frankly, it's all over the place. It's all people in their apartments. You know, so you get like weird scales, you get missing parts. And some of it's amazing and some of it's not so amazing, but you can weed that out pretty quick and just find a few people that are reliable and make good product, and hopefully they're doing it at a price that's sustainable for them and makes it so that they can keep going with it and make a good living for themselves. Because a lot of them, you know, by the way, if you go online and have someone print your models for you, contact them first and just ask a question, any question. What is the actual size of this model? Because usually they'll be like, this model's